I'm Lana Miller, 34, and I just watched 3 moving trucks pull up to the million-dollar estate I've been silently protecting for years. My uncle stepped out of the lead vehicle and announced that I had exactly 1 hour to pack my belongings because this property now belonged to them. My mother stood behind him, not saying a word, while my cousins were already measuring the windows for new curtains. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I smiled, walked inside, and returned with a single envelope that would change everything they thought they knew about power, inheritance, and exactly who they'd been underestimating all these years. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. But to understand how that moment destroyed them completely, you need to know how I became the family ghost they never saw coming. Growing up in the Miller family meant understanding your place in the hierarchy from birth. My cousins Jacob and Emma were the golden children, destined for Ivy League schools and corner offices. My brother Daniel was the athlete who could do no wrong despite his string of DUIs and failed business ventures that my parents quietly funded. And me? I was the quiet one, the one they forgot to introduce at family gatherings, the one whose achievements were met with polite nods before the conversation shifted back to someone more interesting. Every family dinner was a performance where I played the role of supportive background character. When Jacob got into Harvard, the celebration lasted 3 days. When I graduated summa cum laude from state school, my mother mentioned it once to my aunt, who responded by talking about Emma's new internship at Goldman Sachs. I learned early that speaking up only invited comparisons I would lose. So I stopped speaking up. I watched. I listened. I absorbed every slight, every dismissal, every moment they demonstrated exactly how much they valued my existence. The pattern was so consistent it became predictable. Family investment in Daniel's third failed restaurant? Absolutely. Help with Jacob's law school loans? Of course. Acknowledgement when I paid off my student debt 2 years early working double shifts? Silence. But the real education began when Grandpa Richard started getting sick. Suddenly, the family members who called him weekly to check on his portfolio couldn't find time to drive across town when he needed help getting to doctor's appointments. That's when I discovered something interesting about being invisible. Nobody notices when the ghost starts taking notes. Chapter 2. The first time I found Grandpa Richard confused about his medications, I knew the family's convenient absence was about to become permanent. Alzheimer's doesn't wait for holiday schedules or work promotions, but apparently my relatives didn't get that memo. I started showing up every day after work, not because anyone asked me to, but because watching him struggle alone felt wrong in ways I couldn't ignore. While my cousins were posting LinkedIn updates about their latest achievements, I was learning to organize pill dispensers and navigate Medicare paperwork. The funny thing about spending time with someone everyone else has written off, you discover they still have plenty to teach. Grandpa Richard wasn't just rambling when he told stories about the construction company he'd built from nothing. He was sharing decades of business wisdom wrapped in memories of concrete pours and contract negotiations. Never trust someone who shows up only when there's money involved, he'd say, squeezing my hand during his lucid moments. The vultures always circle when they smell weakness, but they scatter when they realize their prey has teeth. I thought he was just being paranoid. Turns out he was being prophetic. Between doctor visits and grocery shopping, I absorbed lessons about real estate investment, contract law, and the art of patience. Having studied business administration in college, I understood the financial concepts he explained as he pulled out documents from his safe, sharing decades of business wisdom about trust structures and asset protection with the clarity of someone who'd spent 50 years outmaneuvering people trying to take what he'd built. Your grandmother and I didn't just save money, Lana, he explained one afternoon while we sorted through his papers. We built fortresses, legal ones, the kind that look simple on the outside but have walls nobody can see coming. I listened because I had nothing better to do, because sitting with him felt more valuable than any family dinner where I'd be ignored anyway, because he treated my questions like they mattered instead of like interruptions to more important conversations. The night he died, I was holding his hand. The rest of the family was at Jacob's engagement party, an event I hadn't been invited to attend. Not that it mattered. Being exactly where I needed to be had become my specialty. His last words were barely whispered, but I heard them clearly. They'll come for everything now, but you'll be ready. At the time, I thought grief was making him paranoid. 2 days later, when the family descended like locusts on his funeral, I realized he'd been giving me a war plan. Chapter 3. The funeral was my first preview of the feeding frenzy to come. I watched my family transform from absent relatives to grieving inheritors with Emmy-worthy performances. Tears flowed freely from people who hadn't visited Grandpa Richard once during his final year. My Aunt Patricia, who'd been too busy with her charity galas to help with his care, delivered a eulogy about their special bond that would have been touching if it weren't complete fiction. My Uncle David spoke about family legacy while his eyes kept drifting to the estate lawyer in the back row. The reading of the will happened the next day. The family packed into the attorney's office like they were claiming prizes at a carnival. I sat in the back corner, still invisible, still listening. The public will was disappointingly simple. Small cash gifts to grandchildren, a few thousand to favorite charities. The house went to my mother with the understanding that it would remain in the family. Standard, boring stuff that left everyone looking vaguely confused. Then came the mention of something called the Miller Family Trust, a throwaway line about additional provisions managed through existing fund structures that made my cousins exchange glances. The lawyer provided a brief explanation about assets being held in trust, but the details were vague. "Is that it?" Uncle David asked, his voice tight with barely concealed frustration. "The trust documentation is maintained separately," the lawyer explained. "Beneficiaries will be contacted directly by the trust administrator regarding any distributions or management decisions." I watched my family try to hide their disappointment. They'd expected immediate access to Grandpa Richard's real estate portfolio, his investment accounts, everything they'd been mentally spending while he was still alive. Instead, they got pocket change and paperwork delays. That's when the speculation started. Maybe the old man had been confused in his final years. Maybe there wasn't as much money as everyone thought. Maybe the trust was just a fancy way of saying the assets had already been spent on medical care. They laughed about it at the post-funeral dinner. Actually laughed. About how Grandpa Richard had always been eccentric. How he'd probably tied everything up in legal knots that would take years to untangle. "Poor old guy," my mother said, shaking her head sadly. "All those years worried about people taking advantage of him. And in the end, he just made everything complicated for nothing." I said nothing, just like always. But for the first time in my life, I was grateful for their blindness. Because while they were dismissing the trust as an old man's confusion, I was remembering every conversation about asset protection, every document he'd shown me, every lesson disguised as rambling stories about the good old days. They had no idea what was coming. But I did. Chapter 4. Have you ever experienced years of family humiliation while secretly holding all the cards? Let me tell you, it's a special kind of torture that builds character you never wanted. The 3 years after Grandpa Richard's death were my graduate education in family cruelty. With no immediate inheritance to fight over, my relatives settled into a comfortable rhythm of treating me like their personal charity case. I was the cousin who lived near the property out of family generosity, the one who should be grateful for every invitation, every leftover opportunity, every reminder of my place in their hierarchy. Christmas dinners became performance art. My cousin Jacob would talk about his partnership track at the law firm while I passed him the dinner rolls. Emma would complain about the stress of her marketing director position while I nodded sympathetically and refilled water glasses. My brother Daniel would describe his latest entrepreneurial ventures, while everyone pretended his last 3 businesses hadn't failed spectacularly. And when the conversation eventually drifted to me, "Lana's doing well," my mother would say dismissively, "still figuring things out," as if I were eternally stuck in some extended adolescence that everyone hoped I'd eventually outgrow. But here's what they didn't know. While they were talking, I was studying, not just nodding along to their stories, but actually learning from them. Jacob's casual mentions of contract disputes taught me about legal loopholes. Emma's work complaints revealed marketing strategies. Even Daniel's failures provided valuable lessons about what not to do with business investments. I enrolled in financial management courses online, started reading legal documents for fun. Yes, fun. Shut up. Spent my evenings diving into estate planning resources and trust structures until I understood exactly what Grandpa Richard had built and why he'd built it that way. The Miller Family Trust wasn't just a holding mechanism for assets. It was a fortress disguised as paperwork. Every property, every investment, every dollar had been carefully structured to protect against exactly the kind of family grabbing I was witnessing firsthand. And the administrator position? The person with absolute control over every decision, every distribution, every aspect of what was actually a multi-million-dollar empire? My name was on those documents. Had been for 2 years. While my family was complaining about probate delays and legal complications, I was quietly managing the very assets they assumed were tied up in bureaucratic limbo. I watched them speculate about Grandpa Richard's wealth, casually mentioning that the old house probably needed to be sold to cover his medical bills. Listened to them discuss helping me find somewhere more affordable to live once the estate was settled. Absorbed their pity about my lack of ambition and their generous offers to help me get my life together. The whole time, I was making investment decisions that grew their theoretical inheritance by 30%, renovating properties they didn't know existed, building the empire they thought they were waiting to inherit. But I was also learning something else. Patience. The kind that comes from knowing you hold all the power while everyone around you assumes you have none. They were so busy looking down on me that they never looked up to see what I was actually doing. Chapter 5. By year 3 of my figuring things out phase, I'd figured out exactly how much my family's pretended generosity was worth. Spoiler alert, less than the monthly returns on their actual inheritance. I'd completed my certification in estate management, finished an online law program with specialization in trust administration, and somehow managed to triple the trust's real estate portfolio, all while maintaining my cover as the family disappointment who couldn't quite get her life together. The irony was delicious, even if I was the only one who could taste it. My cousin Jacob started hinting about the property more frequently, casual mentions about how expensive maintenance must be getting, suggestions that maybe it was time to consider selling while the market was good, helpful observations about how much equity was just sitting there when family members could really use the financial boost. Emma joined the campaign with her marketing expertise. She'd calculated property values in the neighborhood, apparently for curiosity's sake, and thought I should know what kind of asset I was sitting on. Very generous of her to share that research, really. My brother Daniel took a more direct approach. He flat out asked when I planned to sell so we could all get our fair shares of what Grandpa Richard had left behind, because surely I wasn't planning to keep the whole place to myself when there were so many family members who could benefit. My mother orchestrated the conversations with subtle precision, never quite demanding anything, always framing their interest as concern for my well-being. Did I really want the responsibility of maintaining such a large property? Wouldn't I be happier somewhere smaller, more manageable? Someplace where I wouldn't have to worry about property taxes and repair costs? The campaign was so coordinated I had to admire their strategy. If I'd actually been the confused, struggling relative they believed me to be, their approach might have worked. The constant pressure, the helpful suggestions, the gentle reminders that family shares everything. It was psychological manipulation disguised as support. But I wasn't confused. I was prepared. Every legal document had been reviewed by the attorney who'd helped Grandpa Richard structure the trust. Every property deed was secure. Every asset was protected by layers of legal protection they couldn't see through, much less challenge. I even had backup plans for the backup plans. Because spending 3 years watching people scheme against you provides excellent motivation for thorough preparation. The morning they finally made their move, I was ready. I'd been expecting them for months. The coordination had become too obvious, the pressure too consistent. Jacob's corporate law connections meant they'd probably found some legal angle they thought would work, though estate planning wasn't his specialty. Emma's marketing skills had likely been applied to crafting the perfect emotional appeal. Daniel's contribution was probably pure stubborn insistence. When the first moving truck turned the corner onto the estate's driveway, I felt nothing but calm satisfaction. Finally, after 3 years of being treated like a grateful charity case, they were about to discover exactly who they'd been underestimating. I watched them park in my driveway like they owned it, saw them directing moving crews and discussing which rooms would serve their purposes best. Observed my mother standing silently while her siblings took charge of redistributing my life. They walked to my front door with the confidence of people who'd never doubted their right to take whatever they wanted. Uncle David knocked once before trying the handle. I opened the door before they could invite themselves inside. Chapter 6. The look on Uncle David's face when I opened the door was worth 3 years of playing invisible. Pure confidence mixed with just enough fake sympathy to make this painful transition easier for poor, helpless Lana. "Sweetheart," he said, stepping forward like he planned to walk right through me. "We need to talk about the practical arrangements here." Behind him, my mother kept her expression carefully neutral, while Aunt Patricia directed movers toward the house like she was conducting an orchestra. My cousins had already started measuring windows for their upcoming interior design project. "The family has made some decisions," Uncle David continued, pulling out a folder of documents that looked officially important. "It's time to sort out this property situation properly. Your grandfather's estate has been settled, and we've worked out the most equitable distribution of assets." I watched him flip through papers covered in legal terminology and official seals. Someone had invested serious money in making these documents look legitimate, probably Jacob's corporate law connections at work, though this was outside his expertise. "Now, we understand this might be emotional for you," Aunt Patricia added, joining the conversation with practiced compassion. "You've gotten comfortable here, and change is always difficult, but you'll have plenty of time to find somewhere more suitable." Emma appeared beside her mother, tablet in hand. "I've already researched some really nice apartment complexes that would be perfect for you. Much more practical than trying to maintain all this space." My brother Daniel strolled up from the moving truck, hands in his pockets like this was all perfectly normal. "The great thing is, everyone benefits from this arrangement." You get a fresh start without all the responsibility, and the family gets to properly manage Grandpa Richard's legacy. I listened to their rehearsed explanations about fairness, responsibility, and family unity, watched them gesture toward my belongings like they were discussing furniture arrangements, observed the careful choreography of people who'd spent weeks planning this moment. They were so focused on their performance that none of them noticed my expression. I need to get something from inside, I said quietly, stepping back toward the house. Of course, Uncle David nodded generously. Take whatever personal items you need. We've arranged for storage if necessary. I walked through the house they assumed they now owned, past the rooms they'd already divided among themselves, into the office where Grandpa Richard had taught me about patience and preparation. The envelope was waiting in the safe, exactly where I'd placed it 3 years ago. Thick, official documents that told the real story about who owned what, who controlled what, and exactly how many legal mistakes my family had just made. I returned to the front door where they were still directing traffic and discussing logistics. Here, I said, handing Uncle David the envelope with the same calm smile I'd worn for 3 years of family dinners. These are the documents you'll need. He opened it confidently, probably expecting property transfer forms or lease agreements, something that would formalize my surrender to their superior planning. Instead, his face went white as he read the first page, then the second. Then he passed the papers to my mother, whose hands started trembling as she absorbed the legal language that destroyed everything they thought they knew. The Miller family trust documents, the administrator appointments, the asset listings that revealed exactly how much money they'd been discussing so casually, and my name, in clear black letters, as the sole person with authority to make decisions about any of it. Uncle David's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Aunt Patricia grabbed the papers from my mother's shaking hands, scanning frantically for some explanation that would make sense. "This can't be right," she whispered. But it was. Every page, every clause, every legal protection Grandpa Richard had built specifically to prevent exactly what they'd just attempted. They stood there in my driveway, surrounded by moving trucks they'd have to send away empty, slowly realizing they'd just tried to steal from the one person who'd never needed their permission for anything. I was still smiling when I asked them to please remove their vehicles from my private property. Have you ever experienced that perfect moment when people realize they've completely underestimated you? What do you think will happen next? The silence that followed was absolutely delicious. You know that moment when karma shows up fashionably late but makes quite the entrance? This was exactly that, served with a side of legal documentation and a garnish of family humiliation. Uncle David stood there holding the trust documents like they were written in ancient hieroglyphics. His face had gone through several color changes: confusion white, realization red, and finally settling on panic pale. Aunt Patricia kept flipping through the pages as if different viewing angles might change the words. "There has to be some mistake," my mother finally whispered, her voice cracking on the word mistake. "Daddy wouldn't have. He never said anything about..." "About what?" I asked pleasantly. "About leaving his estate to the granddaughter who actually spent time with him? The one who sat through his stories about property values and trust structures while everyone else was too busy for visits." Emma stepped forward, her marketing brain trying to process this complete reversal of fortune. "But the will reading..." "The lawyer said..." "The lawyer read exactly what he was supposed to read," I explained patiently. "The public will with its nice little gifts and standard property transfers, the trust documentation was always separate. Grandpa Richard was very specific about that structure." My brother Daniel, never the sharpest tool in the shed, started laughing. Actually laughing. "Come on, Lana, this is some kind of joke, right? You're not seriously claiming you own everything?" I pulled out my phone and called the estate attorney's office. Put it on speaker so everyone could hear the secretary confirm my appointment for next week to review the quarterly trust reports. Watched their faces as she mentioned the property management company, wanting approval for the new commercial lease agreements. "Holy shit," Daniel breathed, then caught himself and looked around at the moving trucks like he was seeing them for the first time. "Language," I said mildly. "We are discussing family business here." Uncle David finally found his voice, though it sounded strained. "Even if these documents are legitimate, surely you understand that family wealth should benefit the whole family. Your grandfather would have wanted us all to share in his legacy." The audacity was breathtaking. 3 years of treating me like a charity case, and now suddenly we were all about sharing and family unity. I had to admire the speed of their moral flexibility. "Actually," I said, walking toward the moving truck where my cousin Jacob was frantically texting someone, probably his corporate law firm, "Grandpa Richard was very clear about his intentions. He told me exactly who he expected would come circling when they smelled money, and exactly how they'd behave when they thought they could take what wasn't theirs." I gestured toward the trucks. the family members who'd descended like locusts, the careful coordination of their attempted takeover. He predicted this moment almost perfectly. The only thing he got wrong was the timeline. He thought it would take you 4 years to make your move, but you managed it in 3. Impressive efficiency. Really? Aunt Patricia's face flushed red. How dare you suggest we're here for money? This is about family property, about doing what's right for everyone involved. Right. I nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly why you brought moving trucks before talking to me, because nothing says family discussion like arriving with a fully planned relocation strategy. The moving crew was standing around looking confused, clearly wondering if they should start unloading or prepare to leave. Their supervisor approached Uncle David cautiously. Sir, are we proceeding with the move? Or… Uncle David looked at the documents in his hands, then at me, then back at the papers like they might spontaneously combust and save him from this nightmare. There's been a misunderstanding, he said finally. We'll need to reschedule. No, I corrected gently. There's been a clarification. The misunderstanding was thinking you could take my property without my permission, but I appreciate you all coming by to clear that up. What do you think will happen next? Will they accept defeat gracefully, or is this family drama just getting started? Chapter 8. Spoiler alert, they did not accept defeat gracefully, because when people discover their master plan was built on a foundation of pure delusion, dignity is usually the first casualty. The moving trucks departed with all the fanfare of a defeated army retreating from the battlefield. I watched from my front window as Uncle David made increasingly frantic phone calls, probably to every lawyer he knew, searching for some legal loophole that would magically transform his attempted property theft into a legitimate claim. My mother lingered after the others left, standing in my driveway like she was gathering courage for something. When she finally knocked on my door, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Lana, she began, settling into my living room chair with the careful movements of someone walking through a minefield. I think we need to have a serious conversation about what happens next. I poured myself coffee and didn't offer her any. Amazing how quickly my hospitality instincts disappeared when people showed me exactly who they were. What kind of conversation? I asked, settling into Grandpa Richard's old reading chair. The irony of the location wasn't lost on either of us. About the family, she said carefully. About relationships and forgiveness and moving forward together despite this confusion. As if 3 years of systematic humiliation followed by attempted property theft could be written off as a simple misunderstanding. Moving forward together? I repeated slowly. Interesting phrase. Where exactly were we moving forward together when you stood silently while your siblings planned to steal my inheritance? Was that the togetherness part? Or am I missing something? Her face crumpled slightly. I never wanted things to go this far. When David and Patricia started talking about the property, I thought maybe there could be some arrangement that worked for everyone. An arrangement, I said. Like the arrangement where I pack my belongings and disappear while you all move into my house? It wasn't supposed to happen like that, she protested weakly. They got carried away with the planning, but the intention was to discuss options, not to just take over. I stared at her for a long moment, processing the sheer audacity of her revised history. Mom, you stood in my driveway while moving trucks unloaded furniture for your siblings. You watched them measure my windows for their curtains. At what point in that process did you plan to start discussing options? She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. I was trying to keep the peace, to prevent conflict. By sacrificing me, I finished. By letting them walk all over your own daughter rather than risk confronting your siblings. How wonderfully maternal of you. The conversation continued for another hour. A masterclass in gaslighting disguised as family healing. She tried guilt. How could I be so unforgiving? She attempted manipulation. What would Grandpa Richard think about me dividing the family? She even pulled out tears. Couldn't we find some compromise that honored everyone's needs? But here's the thing about spending 3 years watching people reveal their true characters. You develop immunity to their performance techniques. Here's my compromise, I said finally, walking her to the door. You can continue being part of my life if you acknowledge what actually happened here and apologize for your role in it. Not some vague, sorry things got complicated nonsense, but an actual apology for standing by while your siblings tried to steal from me. She stared at me like I'd suggested something unreasonable. Lana, they're my brother and sister. I can't just turn against my own family, but you can turn against your daughter, I observed. Interesting priority system you've got there. After she left, I called the security company. Time to install gates and cameras because something told me the family drama was just getting started. When people discover they can't take what they want through manipulation, they usually escalate to more creative methods. Sure enough, the phone started ringing that evening. Jacob, trying his lawyer voice to explain why the trust documents might not be legally binding. Emma, using her marketing skills to craft emotional appeals about family unity. Daniel, just demanding that I stop being selfish and share like a normal person. I let them all go to voicemail. Amazing how quickly you can train people when you stop responding to their demands. Chapter 9. The legal challenges started exactly 1 week later, because apparently my family needed time to find attorneys desperate enough to take their case. Jacob's corporate law firm, wisely, had declined to represent them. Something about obvious lack of merit and estate law being outside their specialty. They found someone, though. Some solo practitioner who specialized in contested inheritances and apparently had flexible ethical standards. The lawsuit claimed everything from undue influence to mental incompetence, painting Grandpa Richard as a confused old man manipulated by his scheming granddaughter. I forwarded their complaint to my attorney and then did something that probably frustrated them more than any legal response could have. I ignored them completely, because here's what they didn't understand about the trust structure Grandpa Richard had built. It wasn't just legally bulletproof. It was designed specifically to waste the time and money of anyone stupid enough to challenge it. Every document was notarized, witnessed, and backed up with video recordings of his lucid discussions about his intentions. While they spent their savings on legal fees, I was busy transforming my life in ways they couldn't begin to imagine. First, I sold 2 of the smaller commercial properties. Not because I needed the money, but because I wanted to liquidate some assets and diversify the portfolio. The sales netted enough to purchase 3 apartment buildings in the growing downtown district, properties that would triple in value over the next 5 years as the city expanded. Then I did something that would have shocked my family if they'd been paying attention to anything beyond their legal tantrum. I started my own company, Miller Asset Protection, specializing in helping families create inheritance structures that actually protect against the kind of grabbing I'd experienced firsthand. The irony was perfect. My first clients were people dealing with exactly the family dynamics I knew intimately. Relatives who emerged from the woodwork whenever money was involved. Siblings who felt entitled to assets they'd never contributed to. Children who viewed their parents' wealth as their own early retirement plan. I was uniquely qualified to help them, having spent years watching the vultures circle and then experiencing their feeding frenzy directly. Every manipulation technique my family had used became a case study for protecting other people's legacies. The business took off immediately. Turns out there are a lot of families dealing with inheritance drama, and very few attorneys who understand the emotional dynamics involved. I wasn't just creating legal documents. I was building psychological barriers that protected both assets and relationships. Within 6 months, I had 12 clients and a waiting list. Within a year, I'd hired 2 associates and opened a satellite office across the state. By 3 years, I was consulting with estate planning attorneys in 3 states about complex family protection strategies. Meanwhile, my family's lawsuit dragged through the courts like a wounded animal, burning through their savings, and accomplishing nothing except proving exactly why Grandpa Richard had protected his assets so carefully. Uncle David had to mortgage his house to pay legal fees. Aunt Patricia's husband threatened divorce if she didn't drop the case. My cousins stopped speaking to each other as the financial pressure mounted and they started blaming each other for the disaster. I watched their family unity crumble from a distance, feeling nothing but calm satisfaction. They'd chosen greed over relationships, and now they were reaping exactly what they'd sown. The final court hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in March. I showed up in a custom-tailored suit, flanked by 3 attorneys from the most prestigious firm in the state. My family huddled around their discount lawyer like survivors of a shipwreck clinging to driftwood. The judge dismissed their case in 15 minutes, calling it frivolous and a waste of judicial resources. He also ordered them to pay my legal fees, which by that point had reached a rather impressive total. As we left the courthouse, Uncle David tried one last desperate approach. "Lana, please, we're family. Surely we can work something out." I stopped walking and turned to face him, surrounded by reporters who'd gotten wind of the story. The local news loved a good inheritance drama. "You're right," I said clearly, making sure the cameras caught every word. "We are family, and family members don't try to steal from each other. When you figure out the difference between being related and being family, give me a call." The clip went viral on social media. Apparently, people love watching entitled relatives get their comeuppance. Chapter 10. 6 months after the lawsuit ended, I was featured on the cover of Business Weekly magazine as one of the rising stars in asset protection. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that had dismissed me as directionless was now reading about my success in waiting room magazines across the country. My company had expanded to 4 states, and I was regularly invited to speak at legal conferences about innovative approaches to inheritance planning. The girl they'd treated like she couldn't manage her own life was now teaching other people how to protect theirs. But the real transformation wasn't professional. It was personal. I'd moved out of Grandpa Richard's house into a penthouse downtown, keeping the estate as both an investment property and a reminder of how far I'd come. The new place had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, and a home office where I could work without the weight of family memories pressing down on everything. I'd also started dating someone who knew nothing about my inheritance drama and didn't care about my family's money. Marcus was a veterinarian I'd met at a coffee shop, and our first conversation had been about his rescue dog's stubborn personality, rather than trust funds or property values. Refreshingly normal. The family silence was blissful. No more holiday invitations that felt like obligations. No more family dinners where I played supporting character to everyone else's star performances. No more carefully worded requests for small loans or temporary help that we all knew would never be repaid. I sent Christmas cards to exactly 3 relatives. My great-aunt Helen, who'd always treated me kindly but lived too far away to be involved in the inheritance drama. My cousin Mike from my father's side, who'd sent me a congratulations text when my company was featured in the news. And my grandmother's sister Ruth, who'd written me a letter after the court case ended telling me she was proud of how I'd handled myself. Everyone else had made their choices clear. They'd chosen greed over relationships, entitlement over respect, and manipulation over honesty. I wasn't interested in forgiving people who weren't interested in being better. The phone calls started again around my birthday. Tentative at first, Emma leaving voicemails about clearing the air and moving past this misunderstanding. Then more insistent. My mother showing up at my office building, demanding to know when I planned to stop punishing the family for making a mistake. The term mistake particularly amused me, as if 3 years of systematic humiliation followed by attempted theft could be categorized as an innocent error in judgment. I had my assistant screen all calls from family members and forward their messages to a folder I never opened. Amazing how peaceful life becomes when you stop accepting abuse disguised as relationship maintenance. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Henderson, Grandpa Richard's neighbor for 40 years, stopped by my office one afternoon with a plate of homemade cookies and some interesting news. "Your grandfather would be so proud," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "He used to worry about you, you know? Not because he thought you couldn't handle yourself, but because he could see how your family treated you." She pulled out a letter from her purse, yellowed with age and carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. "He gave me this before he died. Asked me to wait a year and then decide if you needed to see it." I opened the letter with trembling hands, immediately recognizing Grandpa Richard's careful handwriting. "My dear Lana," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you've successfully defended what I've left you and probably learned some hard truths about family loyalty in the process. I'm sorry you had to experience their greed firsthand, but I hope it taught you the value of choosing your own family rather than accepting the one genetics assigned you. The trust isn't just about money, sweetheart. It's about proving to yourself that you're stronger than people who try to diminish you. You've spent years watching them reveal their true characters. And now you know exactly who deserves your time and energy. Build something beautiful with what I've given you. Not just financial security, but a life that reflects your values rather than their expectations. And remember, the best revenge against people who underestimate you is becoming exactly who you were meant to be. Love always, Grandpa Richard," I cried reading that letter. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being truly understood by someone who'd been gone for years. Chapter 11. 2 years after cutting ties with my toxic family members, I received an invitation that made me laugh out loud. Emma was getting married and wanted to heal our family wounds in time for her wedding. Because nothing says family reconciliation like needing a successful relative at your social event. The invitation was accompanied by a handwritten note explaining how much she'd grown and learned, how sorry she was about everything that happened, and how much it would mean to have me there as her matron of honor. Matron of honor. The audacity was almost artistic. I RSVP'd with a polite decline and a wedding gift worth exactly what she'd spent on gas driving to my property with moving trucks. The symbolism felt appropriate. But Emma wasn't easily discouraged. She started a campaign that included my mother, several family friends, and even Marcus's veterinary clinic receptionist, who somehow got recruited to mention how healing it might be for me to reconnect with family. The pressure was familiar but ineffective. I'd built immunity to family manipulation through years of exposure therapy. The real test came when my mother showed up at my penthouse on a Saturday morning, bypassing building security by claiming to be my housekeeper. I opened the door to find her standing in my hallway with red eyes and trembling hands. "Please," she said without preamble. "Just 5 minutes. I need to tell you something." Against my better judgment, I let her in. She sat on my white leather couch looking small and defeated. a sharp contrast to the commanding matriarch who'd silently watched her siblings try to steal my inheritance. "I've been in therapy," she began quietly. "Dr. Patterson helped me understand how I enabled David and Patricia's behavior, how I chose keeping peace with them over protecting you." I waited, saying nothing. Experience had taught me the difference between genuine remorse and performance art. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," she continued, tears starting to fall. "I know saying sorry doesn't undo years of choosing their approval over your well-being, but I need you to know that I see it now. I see how badly I failed you as a mother." The words hit harder than I'd expected. This was what I'd wanted to hear for 3 years. Acknowledgement, responsibility, genuine remorse rather than excuses. "I lost my daughter trying to avoid conflict with my siblings," she whispered. "And for what? They don't speak to me anymore anyway. Patricia blames me for not controlling you better. David acts like the whole lawsuit was my idea. I destroyed my relationship with the only child who actually cared about me." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculated emotional appeal. Instead, I saw something I'd never witnessed before. My mother taking full responsibility for her choices without deflecting blame or minimizing consequences. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, standing to leave. "I don't even expect you to want a relationship with me. I just needed you to know that I finally understand what I did. And I'm sorry. Not sorry things went badly, but sorry for every single choice I made that hurt you." After she left, I sat in my living room for hours, processing emotions I'd spent years carefully compartmentalizing. Marcus found me there when he came home from his Saturday clinic hours, still staring out the window at the city lights. "How do you feel?" he asked gently, settling beside me on the couch. "Confused," I admitted. "I've gotten so good at protecting myself from them that I'm not sure how to process actual accountability." We talked until late that night about forgiveness, boundaries, and the difference between accepting an apology and rebuilding a relationship. Marcus didn't give advice, just listened and asked thoughtful questions that helped me sort through my conflicted feelings. The next morning, I called my mother. Not to reconcile completely, but to acknowledge her apology and suggest we start small. Maybe coffee once a month. Maybe gradual rebuilding of trust through consistent actions rather than grand gestures. She cried with relief, but also accepted my conditions without argument. Therapy had apparently taught her the value of earning forgiveness rather than demanding it. As for Emma's wedding and the rest of the family, they could heal their own wounds. I was done being responsible for other people's emotional comfort. Some relationships are worth rebuilding. Others are worth walking away from permanently. Learning the difference had been the most valuable inheritance Grandpa Richard could have given me. Chapter 12. 5 years after the moving trucks left my driveway empty, I was standing in my own boardroom, presenting quarterly reports to investors who'd backed my asset protection company's expansion into international markets. Miller Asset Protection had become the premier firm for complex inheritance planning, with offices in 12 cities and a client list that included some of the wealthiest families in the country. The girl they dismissed as directionless was now managing a multi-million-dollar business built on protecting people from exactly the kind of family greed I'd experienced firsthand. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was the phone call I'd received that morning from my assistant, informing me that Uncle David had contacted our office requesting consultation services. Apparently, his own children were now fighting over his assets, and he needed help protecting his legacy from their grabby hands. The irony was so perfect I had to admire the universe's sense of humor. I declined to take his case personally, but referred him to one of my associates. Professional courtesy. Nothing more. Some lessons people have to learn the hard way. My relationship with my mother had slowly rebuilt over the years into something genuine and healthy. We had coffee every few weeks, and she'd proven her commitment to change through consistent actions rather than empty promises. She never pushed for more contact than I offered, never guilt-tripped me about the rest of the family, and never minimized the impact of her past choices. Emma had tried reaching out sporadically, usually when she needed something: help with her divorce proceedings, advice about her own inheritance planning, support during her custody battle. I responded politely but maintained clear boundaries. Forgiveness doesn't require friendship, and reconciliation doesn't mean forgetting. The rest of the family had faded into background noise. Christmas cards stopped coming when they realized I wasn't responding. Birthday invitations ceased when they accepted I wouldn't attend. They'd moved on to fighting among themselves, apparently having learned nothing from their failed attempt to steal from me. But the sweetest moment came at a legal conference where I was the keynote speaker, presenting on innovative approaches to inheritance protection. In the audience, I spotted a familiar face: my law school roommate, Sarah, who'd become a successful estate planning attorney. After my presentation, she approached with a huge smile and a confession that made my day. I have to tell you something, she said, laughing. Last month, I had a potential client consultation that I think you'd find hilarious. This woman came in wanting help contesting her sister's inheritance, claiming the sister had manipulated their grandfather. My eyebrows rose with interest. The sister's name was Lana Miller, and she'd inherited a trust worth several $1,000,000. The client was convinced there had to be some legal angle to challenge it, some way to prove undue influence or mental incompetence. I grinned, already knowing where this was going. I looked up the case files, Sarah continued, saw the court records from their failed lawsuit, read about your company, and realized exactly who this woman was talking about. I told her she had no case and referred her to a therapist instead of a lawyer. That evening, Marcus and I celebrated with champagne on our penthouse balcony, toasting the life we'd built together, one based on mutual respect, genuine love, and complete freedom from family drama. Do you ever regret cutting them off? He asked, watching the sunset paint the city in golden light. Never, I answered honestly. Grandpa Richard was right. The best revenge against people who underestimate you is becoming exactly who you were meant to be. I'd built an empire from their dismissal, created meaningful relationships with people who valued me, and learned to protect what mattered most. My success wasn't just measured in dollars or business growth, but in the peace that came from living authentically, rather than performing for people who would never appreciate me anyway. The invisible girl had become inalcanceable, and my family had learned, far too late, that underestimating someone who observes in silence is the most expensive mistake they could have made. Some stories end with forgiveness and reconciliation. Others end with liberation and success. Mine ended with both power and peace. Exactly what Grandpa Richard had planned all along. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales of family drama, inheritance battles, and the sweet satisfaction of proving doubters wrong. Sometimes the quiet ones are the ones you should never underestimate.